Jerome Washington wiped the sweat from his forehead as he looked up at the mountain trail ahead. His old hiking boots were already getting dusty, but he didn't mind. This was their big summer adventure, even if it wasn't the fancy Disney trip his daughter had been talking about at school. "Daddy, are we there yet?" Aisha asked, dragging her feet a little. She was only 8, and her short legs were working hard to keep up. In her arms, she carried her most precious possession, a small stuffed dragon named Sparkles that she'd had since she was tiny. "Not much further, baby girl," Jerome said, checking his phone again. No signal, just like he expected. But the GPS still showed they were heading the right way toward the camping spot he'd found online. It was free, which was exactly what his budget needed after paying rent and buying Aisha's school supplies. Jerome worked nights cleaning offices at the community college. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and let him be home when Aisha got back from school. Sometimes he felt bad that he couldn't give her everything the other kids had, the newest toys, fancy vacations, a bigger house. But she never complained. She was happy just spending time with him. "Look at those rocks, Daddy." Aisha pointed up at the strange formations around them. The locals called this Dragon's Valley, and Jerome could see why. The rocks twisted and curved like giant sleeping creatures, worn smooth by thousands of years of wind and rain. What Jerome didn't know was that those weren't just rocks shaped like dragons. Deep underneath the stone and earth, 5 actual dragons had been sleeping for a very long time. So long that most people had forgotten they ever existed at all. The biggest dragon was called Pyraxis. She was older than any human city, older than most human stories. 1,000 years ago, when the world was different and humans were just starting to build their towns and roads everywhere, Pyraxis and her friends had decided they were tired of all the noise and fighting. They'd found this quiet valley and gone to sleep, planning to wake up when the world was peaceful again. But the world had never gotten peaceful. It had gotten busier and louder and more crowded. So the dragons just kept sleeping, dreaming of the old days when they flew through empty skies and the only sounds were wind and water. As Jerome and Aisha walked deeper into the valley, something started to change. Jerome began humming without thinking about it, the same gentle song he used to sing to Aisha when she was a baby and couldn't sleep. His voice echoed softly off the rock walls, creating a sound that was different from anything that had been heard in this place for centuries. It wasn't the clash of metal or the shouts of warriors. It wasn't the rumble of machines or the honking of cars. It was just a tired father, humming quietly to make the walk easier for his little girl. The sound was gentle and warm and full of love. Deep under the ground, something stirred. Pyraxis, who had been dreaming of ancient battles and long-lost kingdoms, felt something touch her mind that she hadn't experienced in 1,000 years. It wasn't fear or anger or greed. It was pure, simple care, the kind of feeling that had almost disappeared from the world. One massive golden eye opened in the darkness beneath the stone. Jerome found a nice flat spot near a small stream and started unpacking their tent. It was an old one he'd bought at a garage sale, with a few patches on it, but it would keep them dry. Aisha helped by handing him the tent stakes and chattering about everything she saw, a butterfly, some interesting clouds, a bird that looked funny when it landed. "This is the best vacation ever, Daddy," she said, even though they'd only been walking for a few hours and hadn't done anything special yet. Jerome smiled. This was why he loved her so much. She found joy in simple things. She didn't need expensive entertainment or fancy hotels. She just needed time with him, and maybe a few stories around a campfire. As the sun started to set, Jerome got a small fire going and pulled out their dinner, hot dogs and beans from cans, nothing fancy. But Aisha acted like it was a feast at a 5-star restaurant. They sat together on a fallen log, eating and watching the stars come out one by one in the clear mountain sky. Far below them, ancient minds that had slept through centuries were slowly, carefully waking up. And for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, they were waking up not because of danger or anger, but because of something beautiful they'd heard in the darkness. When the moon came up full and bright, the valley started to change in ways that Jerome couldn't see. The ground trembled just slightly, like a gentle earthquake, but he was too busy getting Aisha ready for bed to notice. She was tired from all the walking and kept yawning as he helped her into her sleeping bag. Deep underneath the rocks, 5 massive creatures were moving for the first time in 1,000 years. Their bodies were stiff from the long sleep, and dust fell from the cave walls as they stretched wings that were bigger than airplane wings. These weren't the tiny dragons from fairy tales. These were the real thing, ancient and powerful beyond anything humans had ever imagined. Pyraxis was the first to break through the stone. Her scales were deep red like rubies, and her eyes glowed like golden fire in the darkness. Behind her came the others, Thornscale with his green armor-like skin, Mistweaver who looked like she was made of silver clouds, Ironhide whose black scales looked like polished metal, and young Stormwing whose blue scales crackled with tiny lightning bolts. They expected to find what had always woken them before, armies of knights in shining armor, or wizards with staffs and spells, or maybe treasure hunters with swords and torches. For 1,000 years, only violence and greed had ever disturbed their rest. Instead, they found something completely different. Jerome was sitting by the small campfire, and Aisha was already fast asleep in the tent. But instead of going to bed himself, he was working by the light of a small flashlight. In his hands was Aisha's favorite jacket, the purple one with the unicorn on it that she wore everywhere. It had gotten caught on a branch during their hike, and now there was a big tear in the sleeve. The dragons watched from the shadows as Jerome carefully threaded a needle and started sewing up the tear. His hands moved slowly and patiently, making tiny stitches that would hold the fabric together. It wasn't perfect work, Jerome wasn't a tailor, but it was done with so much care that it might as well have been made by an expert. "There we go," Jerome whispered to himself as he finished the last stitch. "Good as new, baby girl." He held up the jacket and smiled, even though no one was awake to see it. Tomorrow, Aisha would have her favorite jacket back, and she'd never know how close it came to being ruined. Pyraxis felt something crack inside her chest, not her body, but something deeper. In all her long years, she had seen humans fight over gold and jewels and power. She had watched them tear down forests and build castles and wage wars over tiny pieces of land. But she had never seen anything quite like this, a human working late into the night, not for money or fame, but just to make sure his little girl would be happy in the morning. The other dragons moved closer, staying hidden in the deep shadows between the rocks. They could see that Jerome was tired, his eyes kept drooping, and he rubbed his neck like it hurt from all the cleaning work he did every night at the college. But he didn't complain or give up. He just kept working, humming that same gentle song under his breath. Then something happened that made all 5 dragons freeze in place. From inside the tent came a small, frightened voice. "Daddy. Daddy, I had a bad dream." Jerome dropped everything and was at the tent in seconds. "I'm right here, sweetheart." "What's wrong?" "There were monsters," Aisha said, and her voice was shaky from crying. "Big scary monsters that wanted to hurt us." Jerome unzipped the tent and crawled inside. Through the thin fabric, the dragons could hear him gathering Aisha into his arms, making soft shushing sounds like parents have made for thousands and thousands of years. "Hey now, there's no monsters here," Jerome said gently. "And you know what? Even if there were, they wouldn't be scary monsters. I bet they'd just be lonely and looking for friends. Maybe they just need someone to be nice to them." "Really?" Aisha asked, sniffling. "Really," Jerome said. "In fact, I bet if you met a real dragon, it would be the nicest, most gentle creature you ever saw. Dragons aren't mean, they're just misunderstood. They probably spend all their time wishing someone would come visit them and maybe bring them cookies." Aisha giggled through her tears. "Cookies? Dragons like cookies?" "Oh, absolutely," Jerome said, and the dragons could hear him making funny dragon voices. "Hello little girl, do you have any chocolate chip cookies? I've been sleeping for so long and I'm very hungry for cookies." Aisha laughed harder, and soon she was making dragon voices too, having a whole conversation with her daddy about friendly dragons who loved cookies and warm hugs and bedtime stories. The 5 ancient dragons stood in the darkness, listening to this silly conversation between a tired father and his scared little girl. And for the first time in 1,000 years, they felt something they had almost forgotten existed, the warmth that comes from being cared for, just for who you are. The next morning started perfectly. Jerome woke up early and made pancakes on their little camp stove, just like he'd promised. Aisha was so excited about her fixed jacket that she wore it even though the day was already getting warm. They ate breakfast by the stream, and Jerome showed her how to skip stones across the water. "Daddy, look at that pretty butterfly." Aisha pointed to a bright yellow butterfly that was dancing around some wildflowers near the edge of their campsite. "That's beautiful, baby girl. But don't go too far, okay?" Jerome was cleaning up their breakfast dishes in the stream, scrubbing them with sand since they didn't have soap. But Aisha was 8 years old, and 8-year-olds sometimes forget about being careful when something interesting catches their eye. The butterfly kept fluttering just out of reach, leading her further and further from the campsite. It danced over rocks and around trees, always staying just close enough to make her think she could catch it. "Come here, little butterfly," Aisha whispered, stepping carefully from rock to rock. She didn't realize she was getting close to a part of the valley where the ground was unstable, where thousands of years of rain and wind had carved hidden spaces under the rocks. The dragons, still watching from their hiding places, saw what was about to happen. Pyraxis started to move forward, but something made her stop. She wanted to see what this human father would do when real danger came. Aisha took one more step toward the butterfly, and the ground gave way beneath her feet. She fell with a small scream into a ravine that was about 8 feet deep. It wasn't far enough to hurt her badly, but when she tried to get up, she cried out in pain. A heavy rock had shifted when she fell, and now it was pinning her left leg against the ground. "Daddy! Daddy, help me!" she called, and her voice echoed off the rock walls. Jerome dropped the dishes and ran toward her voice. When he saw where she'd fallen, his heart stopped for a moment. The ravine was too deep for him to just reach down and pull her out, and the sides were too steep and crumbly to climb down safely. "I'm coming, baby girl. Don't move, okay? Daddy's going to get you out of there." But when Jerome lowered himself down into the ravine, he saw the real problem. The boulder that had trapped Aisha's leg was huge, probably weighing several hundred pounds. It would take 3 or 4 strong men to move it, and Jerome was just one tired janitor who spent his days pushing a mop instead of lifting weights. "My leg hurts, Daddy," Aisha said, and tears were running down her face. "I can't move it." Jerome's phone had no signal, they were too deep in the mountains for cell towers. The nearest road was miles away, and he'd seen maybe 2 other hikers on the trail yesterday. No one was coming to help them. For just a moment, Jerome felt the kind of panic that every parent knows, the terrible fear when your child is hurt and you don't know what to do. But then he took a deep breath and did what he always did when things got tough. He got to work. "Okay, sweetheart, here's what we're going to do," he said, keeping his voice calm and cheerful even though inside he was scared. "Daddy's going to move this rock, and then we're going to get you out of here. It might take a little while, but you know what Daddy always says, right?" "We don't give up," Aisha said, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "We find another way." "That's my girl," Jerome said, and he meant it. He started by trying to lift the boulder with his bare hands, even though he knew it was impossible. When that didn't work, he found a long, thick branch and tried to use it like a lever, wedging it under the rock and pushing down with all his weight. The rock moved just a tiny bit, but not enough. Jerome's hands started to bleed from gripping the rough branch, but he didn't stop. He found more branches and tried to build a lever system. When that didn't work fast enough, he started digging around the boulder with his hands and a flat rock, trying to create space for Aisha to pull her leg free. "Tell me a story, Daddy," Aisha said. She was being so brave, but Jerome could see she was getting scared. So Jerome told her stories while he worked. He told her about brave princesses and friendly dragons and magical kingdoms where everyone was kind to each other. He made up adventures about a little girl who could talk to animals and help them solve their problems. His voice never stopped, and his hands never stopped moving. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and Jerome's clothes were soaked with sweat. His back ached from bending over, and his hands were raw and bleeding. But every time he felt like giving up, he looked at Aisha's trusting face and kept going. High above them, 5 ancient dragons watched a human show them what real strength looked like. Jerome had been working for almost 4 hours when his body finally started to give out. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, and every muscle in his back screamed with pain. The sun was getting hot, and Aisha was starting to look pale and tired. She hadn't complained once, but Jerome could see that her leg was hurting more and more. "I'm sorry, baby girl," Jerome whispered, sitting down beside the boulder for just a moment to catch his breath. "Daddy's trying so hard, but this rock is just too heavy." "It's okay, Daddy," Aisha said, even though her voice was getting weaker. "You're the strongest person in the whole world. You'll figure it out." Jerome felt tears starting in his eyes, but he wiped them away before Aisha could see. He had to be strong for her. He had to keep trying, even if it seemed impossible. Because that's what dads do, they never give up on their kids, no matter what. That's when the shadow fell across them. At first, Jerome thought it was just a cloud blocking the sun. But the shadow was too big, too dark, and it had a strange shape. When he looked up, his brain couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. A massive red dragon was standing at the edge of the ravine, looking down at them with eyes that glowed like golden fire. She was bigger than a school bus, with scales that sparkled like jewels and wings that could cover a basketball court. This wasn't like the friendly dragons from Aisha's picture books. This was a creature of incredible power, ancient and magnificent and terrifying. Jerome's first instinct was to scream, or run, or do something to protect himself. But he couldn't run, and screaming wouldn't help. Instead, he did something that surprised even himself. He stood up, placed himself between the dragon and Aisha, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Please," he said, looking up into those burning golden eyes. "I don't know what you want, and I don't know if you can understand me. But my little girl is hurt. I don't care what happens to me, I'll give you whatever you want. But please, help her. She's just 8 years old. She doesn't deserve this." Pyraxis had expected many things when she finally revealed herself to these humans. She had expected screaming and begging and promises of gold or treasure. She had expected them to call her names like monster or demon like humans always did. She had expected them to try to bargain with her or threaten her or worship her. She had not expected this quiet dignity. This simple, honest request from a father who was willing to sacrifice everything for his child. For 1,000 years, dragons had been the most powerful creatures in the world. Kings and queens had bowed before them. Armies had fled from their roar. They had commanded respect through fear, demanded tribute through threats, and ruled through strength. But as Pyraxis looked down at this tired, bleeding human who refused to abandon his daughter, she felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries. This human had something that all her power and all her treasure could never give her, the kind of strength that comes not from what you can destroy, but from what you're willing to sacrifice for others. Without thinking about it, without planning it, without even realizing what she was doing, Pyraxis lowered her massive head and bent her front legs. For the first time in 1,000 years, the great dragon bowed. "Oh wow," said a small voice from behind Jerome. "Daddy, look. It's a real dragon. And she's so beautiful." Jerome spun around to see Aisha sitting up straighter, her eyes wide with wonder instead of fear. She was looking at Pyraxis like she was seeing the most amazing thing in the world. "Hi, Dragon Lady," Aisha said, waving with her free hand. "I'm Aisha. Are you here to help us? My daddy's been working really hard to move this rock, but it's too heavy for just one person." Pyraxis felt something break open in her chest, not pain, but something warm and bright that she had forgotten existed. This human child wasn't afraid of her. She was speaking to an ancient, powerful dragon like she was talking to a friendly neighbor. Moving with incredible gentleness for such a massive creature, Pyraxis reached out with one claw, a claw that could slice through steel like paper. She carefully positioned it under the boulder and lifted it as easily as Jerome might lift a coffee cup. "There you go, little one," Pyraxis said, and her voice was like distant thunder, but warm and kind. "You're free." Aisha pulled her leg out and wiggled her toes. "Thank you. I told Daddy that dragons were nice. You're not scary at all, you're like a giant puppy with wings." From the shadows around the ravine, 4 more dragons emerged, each one lowering their heads in the ancient gesture of respect. Jerome found himself surrounded by creatures of legend, all of them bowing to him, a simple janitor who had never done anything more heroic than clean floors and love his daughter. "Why?" Jerome asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Pyraxis looked at him with those ancient, wise eyes. "Because you have shown us what true nobility looks like, Jerome Washington. Not the power to rule, but the strength to serve. Not the ability to take, but the willingness to give. You have reminded us what we had forgotten in our 1,000 years of pride." As the other dragons helped lift Jerome and Aisha out of the ravine, Pyraxis made a decision that would change the world. The age of dragon lords was ending. The age of dragon guardians was about to begin. 3 months after their camping trip, Jerome's life had changed in ways he couldn't quite explain. He still worked his night shift at the community college, still mopped the same floors and emptied the same trash cans. But somehow, everything seemed easier now. His old car, which used to break down at least once a month, was running perfectly. The heater in their apartment had mysteriously fixed itself right before winter started. And when Aisha had to go to the emergency room after falling off her bike, the hospital bill that should have cost thousands of dollars simply disappeared from their records. "It's the weirdest thing," Jerome told his friend Tony at work one night. "It's like I've got a guardian angel watching over us or something." What Jerome didn't know was that his guardian was a lot bigger than an angel, and she had scales instead of wings. Pyraxis had made herself Jerome's protector, but she did it so quietly that he never knew she was there. When his car started making strange noises, she would visit the parking lot at night and use her ancient knowledge of metals to fix whatever was broken. When winter storms knocked out power lines, she would carefully repair them with her claws before anyone noticed they were damaged. She wasn't the only one. The other 4 dragons had spread across the world, looking for humans who showed the same kind of quiet heroism they had seen in Jerome. They found Maria, a teacher in Detroit who spent her own money buying school supplies for kids whose families couldn't afford them. They found Robert, a nurse in Chicago who worked double shifts at a hospital and still volunteered at a homeless shelter on weekends. They found Lisa, a single mom in Phoenix who worked 3 jobs to support her disabled son and never complained about being tired. They found David, an elderly man in Seattle who delivered meals to shut-ins even though his own health was failing. All around the world, dragons who had once demanded tribute from kings were now quietly helping ordinary people who had never asked for anything except the chance to take care of the people they loved. The changes didn't go completely unnoticed. News reports started appearing about strange events, broken down school buses that mysteriously started working again right when kids needed to get home, hospital equipment that repaired itself in the middle of the night, and homeless shelters that found anonymous donations of food and blankets appearing at their doors. Some people called it miracles. Others thought it was just good luck. But a few very old books in very dusty libraries started getting checked out more often. Books about dragons and the ancient pacts they had made with humans long ago. Jerome never made the connection. To him, Aisha's stories about seeing a big red lady with wings watching over their playground were just a child's imagination. When Aisha insisted on leaving cookies on their fire escape for the nice dragon, Jerome thought it was cute and played along. What he didn't see was Pyraxis carefully taking those cookies with the tip of one massive claw, eating them with the same care that Aisha had used to bake them. Dragons, it turned out, really did like chocolate chip cookies, especially when they were made with love by a little girl who thought dragons were just misunderstood creatures looking for friends. 1 year after their camping trip, Jerome and Aisha went back to Dragon's Valley. It had become their tradition, their special father-daughter adventure that they saved up for all year long. This time, Jerome could afford a slightly better tent and some fancier camping food, thanks to a small promotion at work that had come out of nowhere. "Do you think we'll see any dragons this time, Daddy?" Aisha asked as they set up camp in the same spot where their adventure had begun. "I don't know, baby girl," Jerome said, but he was smiling. "What do you think?" "I think they're always here," Aisha said seriously. "I think they watch over people and make sure good things happen to families like us. And I think they're not scary at all, they're just really big and really kind." That night, as Jerome and Aisha sat by their campfire sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, 5 massive shadows moved silently through the rocks around them. The dragons were there, just like Aisha had said they would be, watching over this little family that had taught them what real strength looked like. Pyraxis settled herself on a ridge above their campsite, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight. She listened to Jerome tell Aisha stories about brave princesses and helpful dragons, and she smiled, something dragons had rarely done in the old days. In the morning, Aisha would find a single perfect dragon scale beside their tent, ruby red and warm to the touch. She would keep it forever, carrying it in her pocket like a reminder that the world was full of magic for those who believed in kindness. And Jerome would continue his quiet life of working hard and loving his daughter, never knowing that his example had changed the world. Because sometimes the most important heroes are the ones who never know they're heroes at all, they're just people doing their best to take care of the ones they love. The age of dragon guardians had truly begun, and it all started with a single dad who refused to give up on his little girl.